Adelante, Andrés.
Hello, hola a todos, todas. Hello everybody. Esta exposición o esta conferencia va a ser principalmente en inglés. Tenemos invitadas de Nueva Zelanda, de la Universidad de Auckland. Y un momentito. Y antes de que pasen, quiero presentarles un poco de qué se trata y presentar también el laboratorio de realidad extendida que tenemos en la Católica en artes escénicas. So I'm passing now in English. I just said hello. So I'm going to present the laboratory of extended reality of the University of the Pontifical University of Peru and Catholic University of Peru. I apologize for my English, which is kind of a strange pronunciation. So you are seeing my slide? Okay, yeah, fine, okay. Okay, first of all, I will make, for the beginning, I will make kind of a mixture. Entonces, en consideración del inglés, voy a hablar un poco en castellano y en inglés. Espero no caer en Spanglish, sino poder separarlo para dar una pequeña introducción. Okay, so, el Laboratorio de Investigación de Realidad Extendida de Artes Escénicas le pertenece al Departamento de Artes Escénicas y trabajamos realidad extendida. ¿Qué es realidad extendida? Es realidad virtual, como la que se usan los cascos, sea un headset. So that's going to be a mixture, quite a mixture. Yeah. O si no, un celular que se pone en un cardboard. Implica realidad aumentada, como Pokémon Go. Implica video 360, como estos videos que se ven en YouTube. Implica audio inmersivo, ambisónico, realidad mixta y, lo peor de todo, aquellas tecnologías por venir. Como dice ahí en castellano, experiencias digitalmente mediadas que reemplazan o complementan el entorno físico real. So again, in English, extended reality is virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, 360 video, immersive audio, and other immersive technologies. So as a laboratory for extended reality en el laboratorio de realidad extendida en artes escénicas, investiga la praxis desde el punto de vista práctico, tanto desde el punto de vista creativo en actuación como en tecnología, las tecnologías necesarias. Y desde el punto de vista teórico, conceptos y el contexto de creación en XR. Entonces, hacemos praxis y creación y hacemos investigación teórica. Y por otro lado, vemos cuánto esto puede contribuir a las artes escénicas, el XR como una forma de investigación y cuánto puede contribuir como una forma de creación y cuánto las artes escénicas pueden contribuir a las artes performativas. Y uno de los trabajos que hacemos es también la documentación de documentación de obras escénicas con la cámara 360, de obras escénicas existentes. Now back to the prior image. Okay, I have a little mess here. Sorry, I had a problem with my screen, so I'm trying to, I'm using, sorry. How can I change this? Nuestros objetivos son diseño, exploración e implementación de escenarios virtuales, la creación de puestas en escena, estudiar la propia sesión, el espacio y el sentido del espacio, y también trabajar en exploración de alta y baja tecnología. O sea, usos de high-end technology, como cascos, y de baja tecnología, como el celular. Okay, now back to English. The goals of the laboratory are, yeah, what's written there. And the point of this session will be proprioception and spatial sense. Let's go back to the prior slide. I usually have something more than this, better than this. I apologize for the problems with my screen. Disculpen los problemas que estoy teniendo con la presentación. El punto, como decía, es the research and practice and theory in XR. Point is, XR gives new possibilities of creation to scenic arts. It gives new tools of expression, which we should explore and use. And at the other side, the performative arts can contribute to the exploration and the research in XR. Because performative artists or to work, for example, the body, or how do you perceive yourself, concepts like embodiment, proprioception, are very relevant themes and in performative arts. And the knowledge and experience which exist in performative arts and the way of research of performative arts can be a very huge contribution to how XR itself is explored and how it's researched. For example, the problems with avatar creation and user experience, but also the combination of both, like the research in XR and performative arts together can inform other disciplines like psychology and biology and so on. So this is, I think, that will be the theme of the exposition the presentation we're going to see. And we will have now the presentation of the group of Dancing with the Digital, a group of research, really totally interdisciplinary research group of the University of Auckland. You will see it in the presentation, how many disciplines have to flow together to work on this, and they will see how XR can contribute to a sense of our body in diverse disciplines, in dance itself, in performative arts itself, in the creation of XR experiences, and in and to other disciplines. I will state this again in Spanish, and then I will go to your presentation. And I want also to say that I'm very thankful for you for being here. I think the group, the work we're going to just see, the research group which is going to present now is, for me, pioneers in this kind of research. We are really, I think it's a privilege to have them with us. Ahora en castellano, no quiero quitar mucho tiempo con lo que estamos haciendo en el laboratorio de Realidad Extendida, porque estamos muy verdes, estamos muy al inicio. Estamos explorando también cómo funciona la propiocepción, estamos haciendo experimentos de la percepción propia con la cámara 360 y pronto con cámaras digitales, gracias a un CAP que financia la investigación. Pero el punto, y como ven en el slide, es la investigación en XR, desde la praxis y la teoría, puede contribuir las artes performativas, artes escénicas, porque le da, uno es un lenguaje más, es una herramienta más, y lo otro es, nos permite un poco entender cómo entendemos nuestro cuerpo, o explorar cómo entendemos nuestro cuerpo en las artes escénicas, porque abstraen mucho las condiciones de trabajo. Por otro lado, las artes escénicas pueden contribuir a la exploración en las artes, en XR. En XR se estudia, por ejemplo, el avatar o la sensación de corporeidad o la propiocepción. Y desde las artes escénicas se tiene un amplio conocimiento de esos temas. Y se pueden enriquecer la teoría y la praxis de XR con el conocimiento que traemos de las artes escénicas. Pero no solo eso, en la conjunción de las artes escénicas y XR podemos fortalecer la teorización y la experimentación práctica acerca de nuestra corporeidad y de esa manera enriquecer otras ciencias como por ejemplo la psicología, la antropología, etc. Y finalmente pasamos ahora a esta conferencia, a la presentación de este laboratorio como dice, de la Universidad de Auckland. Como mencionaba, ellos tienen un equipo inmensamente interdisciplinar, como van a ver en la presentación en este momento, lo cual demuestra lo interdisciplinar que tiene que ser la investigación en este campo. Y tenemos, como decían antes, un inmenso privilegio que ellas, me parece, este grupo es uno de los pioneros de investigación en este campo y en esta conjunción. Y estoy sumamente agradecido que estén aquí. Entonces, uh, thank you, Rebecca Weber. Thank you, Joanna Cook, for being here. And I will start the presentation. Do you want to say something before I start the video?
Just to say thanks for having us. We're really happy to be here. So Andres is about to play a pre-recorded presentation. We had some concerns about whether the internet connectivity would hold up or not. So we decided to do a pre-recorded presentation, but my colleague Joanna and I are also here in person to answer any questions you may have following the presentation.
So there it goes.
Hello, I'm Joanna Cook.
And I'm Becca Weber, and we're here today to talk to you about choreographic encounters in XR, which means extended or cross reality, inclusive of AR, VR, and mixed realities, and specifically about our project Dancing In, Dancing with the Digital. We'd like to begin by thanking our whole team, whose names you can see here, and who have been working with us for the past 2 years on this project, with a special thanks to the participants in our research.
Dancing In, Dancing with the Digital is a collaborative project with partners from dance study, cognitive psychology, design, engineering, music, and computer science. The project is designed to offer a transdisciplinary, practice-based approach to researching embodied cognition through creative, choreographic practice within XR spaces. It began with a query: how might the shift from the studio practice into the virtual realm impact dancers' sense of embodiment? Embodiment in this instance is one's ability to sense and perceive the body and is trained within dance practices. As Brown emphasizes, quote, in this virtual reality context, the being in the body of embodiment is radically reconfigured. Theories articulating embodied cognition are relatively young within cognitive science, and little is yet understood about how virtual spaces impact our embodied cognitive patterning. Cognition is impacted by our environment, with research illustrating that digital environments impact both our cognition and the sense of our bodies. Although the Dancing In, Dancing With project is ongoing, several key findings have emerged as we endeavour to continue our embodied choreographic practices, but shift them into XR spaces.
Today, we're going to be talking to you about two studies that we've done within the Dancing In, Dancing With project. The first of these two studies explores the design space for immersive embodiment in dance and was published in IEEE VR in 2022. The second is about choreographic encounters in XR, offering reflections on dancing in, dancing with the digital from dancers' own experiences, and was published in Body, Space, and Technology in 2022. We'll begin with Study 1, Exploring the Design Space. In this study, we explored the question, how can VR support feeling embodied and generating movement within a dance context, with sub-questions including, how can we better understand factors that impact embodied dance experiences in immersive environments, and what are the design opportunities for responsive VR for dance? We took an action approach with iterative workshops. During these, qualitative data was gathered through unstructured group interviews, reflected upon through memoing and author discussion, and used to inform the next data collection session, in line with action research approaches, in which planning, action, and results analysis steps are repeated iteratively to inform evolving theories and designs. After each workshop, all authors present wrote field notes of their observations, recollections, reflections, and insights to inform software development and future data collection. We complemented this approach with prototype development based on research through design, where the subjective experiences and feelings of workshop participants and the project team provided ongoing design feedback.
As discussed, the data was collected through a series of 5 workshops. In workshop 1, the intention was to give participants a breadth of experience on the available technologies. We invited participants to play with various tools while reflecting on how they were experiencing embodiment.
In workshop 2, a ceiling-mounted Ryko Theta VC360 camera with 4K resolution feed was streamed through a private network with 30 milliseconds transmission delay or less. Using this, participants could navigate with 3 degrees of freedom via a standalone Oculus Quest VR headset. Later on, we introduced Google Tilt Brush on the same headsets. Our observations from this workshop included that dancers experience decisions as externally driven from a third-person perspective, even referring to themselves as avatars in 360 video. They noted a focus on creating digital artifacts in Tilt Brush rather than on prioritizing a felt sense of bodily movement. Haptic feedback from contacting another person while dancing helped to mitigate this occurrence. They also observed a mismatch between their sensory input and the perspective of the 3D camera. For instance, the camera offered a perspective that was higher than their usual way of seeing, and that perspective remained stationary despite the dancers moving through space.
The point of view offered by the placement and angle of the 360 camera was one of the most salient features of the previous workshop. In workshop 3, we wanted to explore 360 video again with a shift in angle. Additionally, the last workshop explored co-located collaboration, and we wanted to explore remote collaboration during dancing. So we invited international expert remote participants to explore remote collaboration with us. In workshop 4, we aim to explore how the 360 point cloud and prototypes of particles and responsive environments fostered embodiment for dancers. We will now discuss each half in turn.
In the first half of the workshop, participants used the 360 point cloud feed with cameras mounted in the center of the ceiling with a VR headset. Participants took turns wearing the VR headset to navigate through the 360 point cloud and other dancers were asked to enter and leave the space with the participant. After the person wearing the headset had explored the view, they were asked to try and choreograph another dancer using the VR view. As you can see in this image, there were some technical constraints with the technology, meaning the resolution wasn't able to appropriately represent the movement well. Thus, the majority of time in this workshop explored some bespoke effects designed in Unity. We then moved through the immersive scenes created in Unity. One at a time, dancers put on the motion capture suit and used the VR headset to explore the particle emission scene, a color-changing scene, and a scale-changing scene. Dancers changed their movement quality to see the effects on the particles and found the presence of various VR effects, altering their movement generation patterns. Of these, the velocity-related particle emission scene, which you see here, sparked the most movement from participants over the course of all workshops, with participants focused mainly on moving extremities. A limitation of the perception neuron motion capture software is that there are only 2 points of capture for the spine, the pelvis and the upper back, which creates a stiff spinal motion. This was a small frustration for some dancers, as movement of the spine is important to motion as a whole.
Within this workshop, we also explored some initial prototypes of 2 responsive environmental scenes. These scale and terrain-changing scenes encourage huge and rapid movement from some participants who are looking for big responses in the landscape. These prototypes were developed further for the next workshop. Workshop 5 explored particles, environments, and soundscapes through 6 different scenes. In the first scene, particles responded to a range of parameters, which meant that the representation started as more abstract, with low gravity and particle lifetime and high inherited velocity, emphasizing the movement created. As the workshop continued, we then progressed towards a more directly visible representation of the body through increasing gravity and decreasing particle lifetime and inherited velocity, so particles stay closer to the point of origin.
Scene 2 was scale-based. It was extended from the prototype in Workshop 4. It enabled us to investigate how movement might be directly coupled to the environment. From the initial prototype, more blocks were added so that the dancer was in the center of the landscape. Each block changed height according to the average speed of a group of joints. Trackers corresponding to neighboring body parts controlled geographically grouped blocks. This layout was designed to give a greater sense of control over the environment and easier prediction of the effect of movements. You can see an example of this scene here. Scene 3, seen here, was designed to visualize movement over time. The terrain was procedurally generated using 4 octaves of purlin noise controlled by body movement and average speed. This resulted in fast or sudden movements being expressed as gritty, spiky landscapes, and slow or gentle movements expressed in smoother, flowing landscapes. The user perspective advances in the landscape with the scale, lacunarity, and persistence values gradually frozen behind the midpoint of the terrain map, such that a user in VR can turn around to see their past movement reflected in the frozen terrain behind them. The terrain in front of them was constantly evolving with their movements. 2 sound scenes enabled the investigation of oral feedback. One explored triggers. Thresholds were configured to trigger once a body part had undergone a rapid deceleration. On passing the threshold, a tone was played, and one of the floating balls flashed to provide simultaneous oral and visual feedback. The note or pitch of tone was randomly selected each time the threshold was crossed. The notes selected were not all in the same key, sometimes yielding dissonance and sometimes yielding musicality. Different tones were used for hands and feet to enable identification of which body parts were related to which sounds. In addition, ambient background noise was used to indicate changes in movement qualities over time. The track glided between 2 synth loops depending on whether acceleration had been increasing or decreasing over the last 30 seconds. With decreasing acceleration, the track favored a loop heavy in bass frequencies with a slow rhythm. With increasing acceleration, a mid-frequency rhythmic track was favored. This effect reflected trends in movement activity over time. We'll now take a look at a clip of this audio scene so you can see how that played out.
The second sound scene was termed the ambient scene. It was designed to explore linear relationships between movement and visual and oral feedback. Floating spheres change color from white to black according to the average velocity of joints in the body. Similar to the scale scene, spheres were grouped such that neighboring body parts corresponded to geographically neighboring spheres. The floor oscillated in a gentle radial sine wave pattern at an amplitude that linearly increased with fast movement and decreased with slow movement. The sound of rushing air reflected the overall speed of the dancer in a linear relationship to volume. An ambient musical track played at constant volume in the background to enhance immersion. This scene contrasted the sharp sudden feedback given in the trigger sound scene with feedback that had more fluid and airy qualities, combining feedback in the form of audio, shape, and color. We'll now take a moment to watch a sample of this scene.
The final prototype shown to participants was of a user in VR controlling the parameters behind the particle representation scenes via an in-game control panel. The parameters available for adjusting were as follows: minimum emission, velocity emission multiplier, particle start speed, gravity, inherent velocity multiplier, particle lifetime, enabling collision, color, and enabling or disabling different areas of the body. Participants could see the effects of these changes on the particle representations as they were made. As we look back over the 5 workshops, the main takeaways from each one were as follows. For workshop 1, open-ended applications and collaborations were most interesting for embodiment. Collaboration can be symmetric, asymmetric, synchronous, and asynchronous. Virtual objects can mediate collaboration. Workshop 2, collaboration through contact dance and virtual objects generates interest. Ultimately, 3D art focuses on virtual objects more than the body. The sensory mismatch between visual perception and contact dance touch is provocative. Workshop 3, remote collaboration is motivating, yet the visual sensory mismatch without touch is less motivating. Workshop 4, the resolution of point cloud was not sufficient to perceive movement. Digital visualizations of movement through particles in responsive environments provoked creative movement generation. In workshop 5, physical properties of responsive particles change how much movement is perceived. Visual effects co-located to the body support embodiment. External visuals or sound direct attention outward, but can play supportive roles. Indirect and direct coupling between effects and movement provide interesting depth and variation.
So overall, our findings around the design space is that our design space to support immersive embodiment in dance is comprised of 4 major dimensions: control, collaboration, real-time visual effects, and real-time auditory effects. Both dance and engineering participants enjoyed clear and direct relationships between movement and immersive effects. Direct relationships enable participants to feel agency over the immersive world and in control of it, while indirect relationships offered enjoyable challenges. Choreographic collaborations were a source of inspiration and motivation for creative movement generation. Participants interacted asynchronously through virtual objects in space. In all workshops, participants spontaneously chose to interact synchronously. We reflected also on the possibility of dancing with oneself asynchronously by recording a movement sequence and then dancing with it. Collaborative dance holds the potential to support embodiment, whether in real time or not, with full or partial awareness of the other. Real-time visual feedback is crucial for immersive embodiment, but challenging as effects can draw attention away from one's body and movement. In order to support feeling embodied in virtual reality, our reflections point to real-time responsiveness to full-bodied movement as an essential characteristic of the visual effects. The axis for control is relevant, as the impact of movement on visual effects can be direct or indirect. The types of real-time immersive visual feedback that we explored can be thought of as an axis external to the body at one end of the spectrum and close to the body at the other end. Within this spectrum, there is another design possibility, which combines properties of being co-located with the body and external to the body. For example, trace making through movement. Finally, workshop after workshop, participants mentioned the value of real-time auditory feedback. A primary contribution of this research for computer engineers and software designers is to extend and reframe the concept of embodiment to focus on one's own felt bodily experience and movement rather than how well one inhabits a virtual avatar. This direction enriches and broadens current explorations of self-representation, where instead of aiming for the most realistic version, designers can instead aim for alternate ways of representing the movement of the self in order to shape and deepen felt experiences and find new ways to integrate one's body within virtual environments.
We'll now move on to the second study, where we'll look at auto-ethnographic perspectives within the virtual space.
As we were looking to investigate a choreographic sense of embodiment stemming directly from the unique cognitive repatterning that happens in XR environments, we felt it was only through the practice of being, doing, and creating within those digital environments that we can examine elements of the creative practice and embodiment. Working with a team of computer scientists and bioengineers, professional dancers were presented with a series of XR applications, tools, and bespoke effects discussed before, designed to capture movement and encourage embodiment, which were then redesigned following the participants' feedback. Methodologically, this study proposes multiple methods of investigation, which may be understood within Smith and Dean's model of iterative, creative, and arts research processes, cycling between practice-led research and research-led practice. This study presents on one aspect of this co-design process, namely a phenomenological and autoethnographic reflective practice from the dancer's first-person perspective. In this study, we collected data from several sources during the co-design process. First, our own reflections during the co-design process. Second, excerpts from field notes and journals. and third, participants' first-person reflections in the user testing workshops. Finding synergy between each of these data sources, we will draw on those users' first-person accounts alongside our own in this presentation and present them as one shared voice, in line with Kozel, Gibson, and Martelli's approach, quote, where the perspective of the I, the she, or the we may be one or a combination of our or our dancer participants' perspectives drawn from the workshops. These perspectives, we feel, represent a spirit of bothness these researchers espouse and reflect a shared and communal sensation of the practice of working in virtual realities from a dance artist's point of view. Perhaps the strongest and most recurrent theme that we found was on disconnection between perceptual input from the real world and my own body versus representations in virtual reality. For example, in the initial setup of an Oculus Quest 2 VR headset, the lack of proprioceptive synchronicity with visual representations was my first impression. I noted, my virtual hands not matching my real hands is bizarre. I am executing different movement, gripping my middle finger, clicking with my index finger, in order to make a gesture like pointing with my index finger in the virtual space, creating a disconnect between what I feel and what I create. The emphasis on hands as I make all movement through handheld controllers was limiting. I wrote, a get down sequence where a VR robot mimicked my movement exacerbated this frustration. While the system attempts to determine bodily positioning from my head and hands, it feels like a real shortcoming. Dance is multimodal, yes, but also polycentric. I miss having legs. This sensory disconnect theme continued throughout our explorations. For example, one workshop featured dancers working within a 360-degree 3D point cloud rendering with cameras mounted in the center of the ceiling, replicating the room we were in virtual reality via a live feed. Within the VR headset, we could see the space we were in, the people in the space, and our own body from an external perspective. At first, within VR, there was a mismatch between what could be seen and the real world. There was an approximate 180-degree miscorrelation between where people were located as seen in VR and where their voices were coming in the actual room. Echoing this disconnect, Thomas and Wovaski mentioned that when transported into a virtual reality, quote, the physical environment has not gone away. Rather, it serves as a sort of background to a more dominant visual virtual experience, which takes over the sensory domain.
In the God's eye perspective in 360 VR, I noted that the proportions of my body would become distorted based on proximity to the camera, akin to a fisheye lens distortion on a normal camera. If I stood right under the central cameras, parts of my body would disappear or stretch to abnormal size. If I stepped out from the center of the room, I could see my back body standing in front of me. I noted, it takes me out of my body. It feels like I am standing above and looking down on you all, but also on myself. There's a weird disconnect to my body because I'm back to back with myself. Shifting the 360 camera's perspective from God's eye to person height brought different challenges. I could still see my own body as though it was an external person in the room, and the mismatch between the VR perspective and my real world sensorial perception remained. As I moved, my perspective did not shift. The camera's view and height was stationary, so my VR perspective remained stable, although my physical relationship with the other bodies in space within the room shifted. Within the space, my body was not my body. It was a projected body, one that I could fully control. However, I could sense some reservations within myself as I began to dance. I couldn't see where my feet touched the floor, so I felt resistant to moving dynamically, beginning with very small movements that traveled and only momentarily jumping off the floor. I observed that the safety of knowing that the floor is there to catch you wasn't present. The second theme that arose was the notion of touch as grounding point. I recall the first moment this occurred and the sense of reorientation that came with it. I reflect. As I began to understand the mismatch, another dancer stepped into the space and began to move. It took a while to understand where she was in my vision and where I could see, hear, feel her. How could I move around this real body that I could see in VR, but mismatched? After a few moments of trying to negotiate around each other within the space, she paused and reached out a hand. I found her hand with my own, the VR me reaching backward as I reached out at a 35-degree angle. As my hand found hers, I felt an instant sense of grounding, a heightened sense of safety, and a re-understanding of the virtual world. In this space where my feet don't reach the floor, her hand was the grounding point through which I could further orient myself and grow an embodied sense of confidence. That moment of grounding grew my confidence within the VR space. I was no longer navigating alone, negotiating the seen and heard. The introduction of touch enabled a jumpstart of my sensorial rewiring. The miscorrelation between sight and sound within VR made attuning to my own body and the ability to engage with somatic awareness more difficult. I also noted that I was using an external visual of myself to find touch, not allowing my body to follow touch instinctually. As Popat notes in XR, quote, "The more we engage in finding our way through the environment, the more we are able to orient ourselves in that environment. I wonder if more time spent within this space would allow me to become fully attuned to the rules of that virtual world, and therefore generate intrinsic response systems that would allow me to more easily tune back into my own embodiment, fully trusting my body, fully trusting my knowing of this new world."
Following explorations where the dancers' bodies were accurately represented through a live stream 360 3D point cloud rendering and 360 2D video, realities of seeing the self and one's own body came to the fore. Seeing oneself from an external, objective perspective invited a highly trained, self-critical eye and made it difficult for dancers to stay connected to their inner first-person somatic sensation. This negative self-judgment may result in part because our research participants were professional level dancers. While research relating to dance and body image is mixed, positive impacts of dance on body image occurs with novices, while negative impacts occur with more experienced dancers and those with higher dancer identity. Elements which research argues may contribute to higher levels of negative body image is viewing oneself through mirrors, and dancers' higher tendency to self-objectification, both mimicking the external perspective offered by live stream video in VR. I recall, years of dance training in front of mirrors has conditioned my critical eye. This, coupled with self-judgment that grows from societal beauty standards and my own conditioning, collides in me and produces a heightened self-critical bodily awareness. Stepping into the VR space, the close alignment to my body within the 3D video render of myself, within which I can see myself from many angles, flares the critical. But the direct replication of the body starts to shift, my critical self-judgment begins to ease. This shift from a direct replication of the body came with the introduction of particles, a VR scene created in Unity and experienced through one HTC Vive connected to an Axis neuron motion capture suit as mentioned previously. In this scene, movement was represented in particles emitting from a non-visible body. This was the first experimental demo that really encouraged a lot of movement from participants, as the technology previously explored in workshops was centered around novel perspectives. Here, dancers would shake their limbs and jump around to achieve dramatic effect. One dancer tried to roll a motion from the top of their body to the bottom to create a wave of activity. They also experimented with holding their bodies completely still to stop particle emission and become essentially invisible, playing between movement and stillness to create desired effects in the particle response. An issue that was raised was that visibility of the human form could become clouded when lots of movement was happening around the center of the body. This desire to see the body was at odds with the dis-ease felt when the body was represented in a higher fidelity, more realistic representation through the 360 3D experiment. We felt the introduction of particles rather than an avatar brought with it new levels of embodied and creative freedom. I could step away from a desire to curate my body in a way that is aesthetically pleasing for an audience, and instead turn my attention to the reaction of the particles. I reflected. Within this project, the abstraction of the body into particles mitigated the intense sense of judgment. I felt more freedom to explore without the instant curation of trying to produce something that makes my body look aesthetically pleasing to the viewer's eye. The particles allowed me to shape and reshape my body and, depending on the parameters, abstract my body almost entirely, allowing me to explore and approach movement in new ways.
This project is researching somatic embodiment within XR. But as a dancer adjusting to VR, I initially forgot my body was meant to lead and instead focused on making things happen visually. Initially, the movement generated within the particle scene was directly related to particle response. If the movement was dynamic, more particles would be released in quick succession. Whereas if the movement was slower and more fluid, the particles would release more slowly. Changing parameters in the code, such as particle lifetime, their relationship to gravity, response to acceleration or deceleration, and other physical properties previously mentioned, we explored how the different parameters impacted movement and where the impetus for movement came from. Carol Brown and Slater et al. Argue that the vision overrides other senses within VR spaces, which can lead to a sense of disembodiment. This is something I experienced, as at first my movement was generated through a desire to respond to the external stimuli rather than embodied somatic awareness. However, we noticed that with more time spent in the virtual environment, we became able to direct our attention and move away from the desire to create a visual artifact and re-engage with our sensory perception. In this way, we propose a new creative method, a choreographic sense of digital embodiment that is found through multisensory subjective engagement and enables us to create digital choreographic artifacts. As such, we're currently exploring the possibilities of working with an improvisational, somatic attentional score and a purposeful approach from a felt bodily perspective.
In the process of moving our practice into virtual reality, the idea of treating this digital immersive space as its own location for site dance emerged. The unique affordances and challenges of the VR site are markedly different from both a proscenium stage and a physical location. Cognitive scientist Mel Slater describes a phenomenon in virtual reality called place illusion, where there is, quote, a strong illusion of being in a place in spite of the sure knowledge that you are not there. She argues that bodily and perceptual responses to the virtual environment within the headset override our cognitive understanding that it is not a real world. Something which the dancers' perspectives we found might contest, perhaps due to their heightened embodied awareness compared to a general population. Poppet argues for the centrality of physical engagement in mixed reality, which leads us to question physical engagement in virtual reality and how the difference between live and virtual felt sensations affect embodied experience in XR. When working with the affordances of an XR space, Poppet claims that the more closely coupled virtual elements and physical realities are, the more acceptable the embodied experience, which would seem to imply that in order to be acceptable, virtual sites need to replicate so-called real life, potentially losing the very affordances that make it a unique site for dance making, which raises the question, why not just make dance in the real world? In my journal, I noted, in the VR space, I am not interested in simply replicating real life. Otherwise, what is the point when I can make a work in person? VR offers unique affordances, including a suspension of usual physical rules of real life, like gravity, weight, a multiplicity of or lack of a fixed perspective, and even the solidity and ever-presence of our physical form. What can these affordances offer me as a mover, a maker, or for the audience? We return to the question of balancing real embodied sensation with virtual sensory layers. How might one create a real experience through embodied awareness without losing the affordances offered in a virtual environment? Are there effects that capitalize on VR's possibilities while at the same time fostering an environment which allows us to tune into our first-person, full-bodied sensory perception? And if so, how might those experiences facilitate an exchange of embodied experience? As we've discussed, there are many challenges to working in XR space as a dance artist. As we navigate and explore all of these factors, we recognize too that the potentialities for virtual space in creating new, unique opportunities for dance artists to collaborate across time and space in digital immersive environments exist. Some of these include, 1, a possibility for the work to reach a wider scope of audience in ways that are often limited in traditional in-person approaches to making and sharing dance works. 2, a potential mitigation of some of the social, political, or economic limitations and so-called gatekeeping that can occur in dance. And 3, more opportunities for collaboration and professional connection for artists. There is also the potential for remote audiences to be present in the same virtual space and time as the performers, or what Caputo et al. Call, quote, pure virtual theater. Some research has argued for new modes of audience engagement, potentially foregrounding sensory experience and shifts in perceptual modes towards greater multimodal embodiment, elements which are particularly relevant in dance.
As discussed, a number of themes have arisen within the first stages of Dancing in, Dancing with the Digital. The project initially intended to investigate the alternative sense of embodiment produced by real-time immersive technologies in XR through choreographic practice. We have offered some key takeaways for a design space focused on enhanced embodied awareness and movement generation. We also offered dancers' first-person reflections as we shifted our in-person choreographic practice into digital XR spaces, and how these technologies impacted dancers' sense of embodiment and sensory perception. Of primary significance was the ways in which digital technologies created a sense of disorientation and perceptual mismatch, which created a form of sensory chaos or confusion. Dancers reported not being able to trust the information from their bodies. However, when touch was introduced, dancers found a sense of grounding and reorientation. When dancers were confronted with a high-fidelity, realistic representation of their self-bodies, challenges arose due to the unfamiliar sensation of viewing one's body from an external perspective and the inherent judgment that came with this new reality. One solution that mitigated this default judgment was the abstraction of the body's representation through the introduction of a bespoke particle scene. Within this scene, the bodily form was removed and instead particles were generated by bodily movement. Linking the particle generation to different movement parameters and altering the particle's physical effects generated novel creative movement, but raised the question of whether movement was being generated from an internal sensation or a desire to create a visual effect in the VR environment. Shifting the catalyst for movement through an attentional score, embracing the reciprocal feedback loop between movement as physical sensation and its virtual representation, is one way of embracing the unique affordances of the VR site, and also offers a new creative practice method for choreographers. We propose that digital XR offers new sight for dance creation and performance. It creates opportunities for choreographers and dancers to meet in virtual realities, and new avenues for audiences to be immersed in performance, viewing it from the inside out, and potentially creating a new sense of embodiment, not only for dancers, but for viewer participants as well. Although we're still in the early stages of Dancing in, Dancing with the Digital, we're already experiencing an increased understanding of the virtual environment's impact on embodied perception and discovering opportunities for new ways to engage self, collaborators, and audiences with a growing awareness of both the challenges and benefits of this new virtual terrain. In December, we're looking forward to sharing the next development of this project, a 360 VR video dance work titled Vector. And in the meantime, we're continuing to explore how general audiences respond to VR effects intended to provoke movement and increase embodied awareness.
Thank you.
Ok, gracias. I couldn't, no podía desconectar la compartición de pantalla. Ok. Do you want to say something, Joanna and Becca? No.
Thank you for listening, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Ok, hay preguntas directamente. I think I'm gonna switch to Spanish now, and because it's just a mess if I speak English and Spanish, but I will translate what you answer. I will see if somebody makes this question in Spanish and then translate to English and back to Spanish. Otherwise, it will be just too messy.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Bueno, adelante. Hay preguntas, cuestionamientos, dudas. Como ven, resumiendo muy corto, hemos visto que el trabajo tiene que ser interdisciplinar para entrar en XR. Hemos visto que se pueden realmente revisar y cuestionar conceptos que no son cotidianos y muy usados en artes escénicas, y a la vez enriquecen nuestros conceptos de percepción corporal. Y también vemos que la investigación, por ejemplo, en danza, ¿qué podríamos hacer? ¿Qué significaría poder desconectarnos de nuestro cuerpo? ¿Qué confusiones y qué libertades surgen, ¿no? Y también hemos visto que la investigación realza, o sea, mejor dicho, aporta a inclusive a desarrollos de realidad extendida y temas de psicología, como dijimos al inicio, ¿no? O sea, por ejemplo, que no es necesario ser realista y que hasta puede ser contraproducente, ser demasiado realista. Entonces, quería preguntar, quería preguntar si hay preguntas al equipo de Dancing In, Dancing with the Digital acerca de la investigación que han hecho. Ok. Tenemos una pregunta. Gracias, Alejandra. We have a question. The question is, Ale was interested in the sensation of disorientation in dancers, and she asked herself if that could be even a tool to create dance, to have you explore that, so disorientation as a tool itself.
I think disorientation as a tool is something, as we said, that kind of arose. We weren't expecting it, but I think each of us experienced the disorientation, which did inform the movement that we made. I think we all found with more time spent there, the disorientation lessened. So if we were to use it as a tool, it would be interesting to see kind of how we can continually challenge ourselves and put ourselves in that challenging space, which could be an interesting study to see how participants react to that disorientation as parameters continually change. potentially.
Yeah, I will agree with that. And I think one of the joys of working with dance and technology is that sometimes the things that we see as challenges or glitches or mistakes through the technology actually can become creative prompts and inform the dance. So I love that idea.
Lo resumo, la respuesta es, en resumen, sí. O sea que sí habían calculado desorientación y también ha surgido de manera inesperada, pero ha enriquecido la investigación y también piensan que, bueno, se podría profundizar en una investigación más adelante también, pero también piensan que justamente en esos efectos que podríamos considerar inesperados o casi inclusive negativos, o está uno de los encantos de trabajar con tecnología, ¿no? Con las cosas que se podrían en otros contextos decir glitches, fallas, en realidad son un elemento que enriquece el trabajo. Esa es otra pregunta. Si pueden ustedes, gente de escénicas que están aquí presentes, teatro, danza, música, ¿pueden imaginarse trabajar con esto? ¿Se ven trabajando con esto? I'm asking, they say see self, welcome with it. I will, we made also experiment in the lab. Very simple, was like we used 360 camera and streamed it to the headsets. It was YouTube, but it was in cell phones, in headsets, and the students see themselves from outside. So the body, it was like a very simple setting, no? Yes, it's a Milagros VR. Ahorita traduzco. It's a very simple setting, but yes, we use the 360 camera streaming to a body which is in another place, and the perception is the person see itself in the body from the outside, and they also see a mismatch in the location. But if they move the head, the reaction is immediately. So the physical movement is correlative to the real movement in real time and real position. The body position is displaced, and we had also a delay of 10 seconds. So it was really interesting. It was a glitch. We couldn't work against it, but it made it had really, really interesting feedbacks from the students, which talk of temporal dimension, a physical dimension, a spatial dimension, but nobody mentions a technical mediatic dimension. That was interesting. I will translate this. Similaros, estamos trabajando también temas de embodiment, de percepción corporal, con un setting mucho más simple en este momento, con un streaming de la cámara 360 a los cascos, donde los estudiantes se ven fuera del lugar, o los profesores, o sea, docentes, bailarines se ven fuera del lugar, la cámara está acá, ellos se ven a sí mismos desde otra perspectiva, desde afuera, el movimiento de su cabeza reacciona inmediatamente a su posición, pero su posición corporal no es correspondiente, lo cual crea confusiones a la vez que creaciones sumamente interesantes. And okay, we have a question from Angelo Silva. Angelo pregunta acerca de su hija, cómo ella percibirá las próximas experiencias mixtas, ¿no? Donde puede jugar con cambiar la perspectiva y qué creen ellas que podría ser el futuro de compañías de XR. So, do you see the chat?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a
I-
question of Angela.
thanks, Angelo. I think Angelo, yeah, thank you. I think it's really interesting. One of the big constraints with this kind of work is that it's very costly to access the technology and very time intensive to do the sort of coding and things behind the scenes. So certainly big companies like Disney have, you know, a lot of access to that stuff, and they can take these ideas much further. I think one of the things that our work with the computer science engineers and computer science students has sort of revealed is that typically these mixed reality experiences, whether for entertainment or otherwise, are really just visual and maybe your hands. And what we're really excited about is the opportunity to engage the whole body. So I think potentially, you know, it could move in a way that she is not just seeing as though she's Elsa, but actually moving through the environment with her whole body. And yeah, that change in perception, I think, is probably a likely next step.
Traduzco rápidamente en respuesta a Angelo. Sí, actualmente las experiencias son básicamente visuales, a veces se ven las manos, pero cree que el desarrollo que va a seguir va a ser la involucración del cuerpo entero en las experiencias más inmersivas, en estas realidades. Félix, voy a traducir tu pregunta. Felix says, thank you for the presentation. And the question is, since when, you know, are being developed research which connect scenic arts with new technologies? How was the reaction to these new forms of research in the academic community, both students and teachers in university?
Thank you for that question, Felix. I think, you know, we've been working a lot with dance students and a little bit with computer science students. And I think particularly for the dancers, it's still quite a new territory. And so it's very fun for them. It's like getting a new toy. And that novelty is something that I wonder how long that novelty will stay around for. But I'm very aware that there are other, you know, a small community of researchers worldwide who are working in these sort of intersections between art and mixed realities, and some exciting projects out there alongside our own. Joanna, did you want to respond?
I was just going to say that I agree. I think that there's a lot of novelty from people across the board who have kind of seen or had an opportunity to be immersed in the environment that we've created. Yeah, that's really exciting. But as Becca said, it would be interesting to see how long that novelty lasts for before new developments need to be made.
La respuesta es la reacción con estudiantes, por ejemplo, de computación y sobre todo básicamente artes escénicas. Muchos son muy curiosos y les encanta jugar y bueno, también la pregunta es cuánto tiempo va a quedarse esto como algo nuevo, ¿no? Como nuevas tecnologías y cuánto tiempo va a quedarse esta novedad. ¿Cuánto tiempo va? Quería yo comentar también algo al respecto. O sea, las nuevas tecnologías en los 80 eran disco láser. O sea, eso siempre va cambiando y siempre tienen ese encanto de novedad y curiosidad a la vez que se mezcla con, ya se vuelven cada vez más cotidianas. Pero sí creo que tenemos para rato de experimentación con esto. I say, I was answering the new technologies, the concept of new has always evolved. In the 80s, it was a laser video disc, which nobody knows. And much people don't even know it existed. And but I'm sure that that XR has quite a big potential, so it will last a while until it gets too used. Yes. I think also, I will say it in first in Spanish, then in English. También creo, estimada audiencia, que las personas escénicas son sumamente son conejillos de India sumamente interesantes. No, cuando hemos trabajado con gente escénicas, hacen cosas que no suele hacer el usuario normal. Por ejemplo, hay una pared, en el Oculus aparece una pared en la cual uno no debe chocarse, es una pared para proteger a uno. Lo primero que hace la gente escénica es caminar sobre la pared, o se tiran al piso, cosas que usuarios normales no suelen hacer. Y eso es de especial importancia y riqueza. En esta investigación, como les decía, en XR se trabaja mucho el concepto de propiocepción, embodiment, son presence, embodiment, presencia y corporeidad, son conceptos básicos en XR, y yo creo que el aporte de los artistas escénicas puede ser de especial valor justamente por este tipo de experimentación. Y he visto escenas donde alguien de escénica se tiraba al piso y el de audiovisual, que nunca se tiraba al piso, decía, wow, pero decía, qué interesante, se pueden crear capas de información de acuerdo a en reacción a la altura del cuerpo, lo cual a la persona escénica no se le habría ocurrido. Entonces, justamente en la confusión interdisciplinar que tenemos en el laboratorio y que existe, como ven, que es básica en el laboratorio que hemos visto, es ahí también donde se crea la mayor cantidad de conocimiento. So I translated, I was saying that I think scenic people, people of performative, not scenic, sorry, performative people are very interested in genetics. Is that the right word? Like experiment, no, it's laboratory rats. I mean, to make experiments with them, because the kind of curiosities they have is kind of special. I was telling, for example, you have this wall in Oculus for safety, and the first thing dancers do is going against the wall, getting out of the wall, trying to make the wall collide with the safety wall. So that's, or they throw themselves on the floor, which other people wouldn't do. So that's why I think they are especially good in the research about so relevant terms in XR, like embodiment and presence and so on. And I also wanted to say, for example, we had a case where a dancer threw herself on the floor, and the audiovisual person said, wow, I wouldn't do that. But at the same time, so the visual person was thinking of contents, reactive contents due according to the position of the body. It just came to her when she was looking at it. And that would have been something the performative person wouldn't have thought of. So exactly in the interdisciplinary work of this kind of laboratories, in the interdisciplinarity, is where most of the knowledge is being produced.
Yeah, certainly. And I think one thing that we believe, dancers know their bodies so well, and they develop their perception so well that we can go beyond that sort of, okay, it feels weird, it feels disorienting, and kind of dig deeper into what does that mean perceptually, and then how can we create technology that mitigates that in some ways.
I will translate it. Justamente, como dice Becca, por ejemplo, bailarines conocen bailarines conocen también su cuerpo y están tan familiarizados con él que pueden ir más allá de esas primeras sensaciones de desorientación y autoenajenamiento corporal, y justamente pueden profundizar en eso. Y es ahí donde surgen también los conocimientos relevantes en este tipo de experimentos. I will translate a question of Ale again. It's interesting you talk of game, because she thinks it's an essential part of scenic arts. It's funny that technology drives us back to that essence. So I'm sorry for my English spelling is just a mess of languages. Okay.
We're very
So what
impressed.
do you think of the...
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of like what game design thinks about and what performing arts thinks about. You know, you have a user or a player in game design. We have an audience that we think about their experience. We think about the scene design. We think about all the multimodal elements that come together to create that game. And I think because games has really been the thing driving these technologies, and that's where these technologies have been developing, that it's kind of a natural fit for it to feel fun like a game when we start to use them for other purposes too. And they are fun, they're just fun to be in.
Bueno, no se me ocurre mucho para traducir, o sea, sí, los juegos, también hay siempre la asociación con los juegos, mucho de XR tiene que ver con juegos, pero sí, el factor juego es importante sorry, no se me ocurre más para traducir, es cierto que es una exploración divertida, ¿no? Un juego, esta investigación, investigar en este campo, ¿no? Otras preguntas. Y ya, hay una pregunta de Ángelo acerca de un traje de Tesla Suite. Es un traje que permite sensar el movimiento de la persona. Y entonces hay la posibilidad de que este vestido tenga una reacción háptica, o sea, física, a lo que siente el personaje, ¿no? O sea, por ejemplo, un golpe se siente en el traje, ¿no? Entonces tiene un feedback háptico. Eso podría ser interesante para juegos, pero también para entrenamientos. You see the question from Angelo in the
Yeah,
chat?
I think it's really interesting. Gracias, Angelo. It's interesting how our perception interacts, because yes, we can get closer to the real perception, like feeling pain, but there's also studies and apps, game apps, that have been designed to trick our perception. So one of the ones that we've been inspired by was developed for children who had burns, and instead of feeling the treatment as pain, they get into this ice world, and they have like ice crystals, and they feel it as cold. So it can work both ways, in that it's more realistic experience, and also that we can use the ways that technology and perception interact in a variety of contexts.
Sí, el tema es interesante, y también ella menciona un trabajo que los inspiró. O sea, hay una aplicación para niños con quemaduras, donde hay maneras de engañar la percepción, donde la tecnología y la percepción interactúan de manera que no son realistas, sino todo lo contrario, como que cambia el contexto. O sea, los chicos con las quemaduras sienten que están en el mundo de hielo, y sienten frío en vez de esta quemadura. Entonces, o sea, es lo contrario a realismo, ¿no? También es una opción, ¿no? Las dos son opciones interesantes. So, we will look forward a lot to work together, work with you, to invite you to come around to show Victor the piece you're working on, and also, if possible, make workshops or make experiments on distance. We have in this moment kind of two Oculus, I think, but it would be great to adapt it to cell phones. But okay, the thing is, we're looking forward to work together in our laboratory. We're working also a lot, but we're really green, as we say here. So just in the starting point, we were really interested in embodiment, you know, also related to the standard questionnaire. We are applying here the standard questionnaire of Mara Gonzalez Franco, a paper about embodiment questionnaire. Well, we can talk about that later. But we would love to collaborate and also on medium term to long term have you around here.
Yeah, we would love to, and we look forward.
Yeah.
For now, we have as only equipment 360 camera and audio. We have also audio exploring audio research team, and we'll have soon the Kinect Azure cameras to 3 to make a little bit more depth recording you're doing. But we don't have, for now, computer people, so I hope more that. But we'll learn a lot of you, if it's possible. Está diciendo que nos encantaría invitarlas a mediano o largo plazo, ver si podemos hacer workshops, si podemos hacer aquí los experimentos que ellas hacen. El laboratorio por ahora tiene una cámara 360, igual eso nos permite tematizar mucho el campo de corporeidad, la percepción corporal, que también es uno de nuestros grandes intereses. Y como dice, vamos a tener todas unas cámaras que permiten la captura volumétrica para hacer cosas también más parecidas a las que hacen ellas, salvando las distancias, que hay, claro. So, are some more questions? Estimado público, preguntas a este equipo de Dancing with the Digital and Dancing in and with the Digital, isn't it? Why is the name?
The name came from the first funding application that we did. And I think it was a way of trying to capture the bidirectionality of exchange of information, like you say, in an interdisciplinary team, we're all bringing our own information, so.
Bueno, la pregunta era justamente, la pregunta era por qué el nombre y en y con, y eso tenía que ver también con la interdisciplinaridad del tema, o sea, de la investigación. Lo pusieron cuando recibieron la primera financiación, ya hace 2 años. Your team is working 2 years, isn't it? Or longer?
Yeah, 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years. Great. Yes, I think I said, sir, the possibility of working, the relevant thing of this is the things that technology can help us to understand our discipline better, and our discipline can help to understand technology better, and both together can help us to understand our world and ourselves. Exactly. Better, or relation with ourselves. Decía que la tecnología, o sea, este tipo de investigación puede ayudarnos, la tecnología nos puede ayudar a entender mejor nuestra disciplina a entender mejor la tecnología y juntas entender un poco mejor nuestra percepción general de nosotros mismos, ¿no? Hay una pregunta más. The question of Alex is, your work is is funded primarily by your university or also other actors like state or private enterprises?
Yeah, initially it was funded through the university, and then this year we applied to Creative New Zealand, which is the creative funding body within the main funding body within New Zealand, for a new kind of stream fund that they opened up that was specifically for digital new works. So we applied for that and received funding through there as well.
Which we're very grateful for.
Sorry, I didn't understand the last thing. What did you say, Becca?
Oh, I just said we're very grateful for the funding that we've gotten.
Sí, o sea, ellos fueron financiadas inicialmente por la universidad, luego han conseguido un fondo importante de Nueva Zelanda para la industria creativa en tecnología. Entonces, si tienen otra pregunta, si no voy cerrando la sesión. Disculpo otra vez por mi caos al inicio. Fue un problema causado por mi nerviosismo en relación con la tecnología. Sí, cuando uno falla, cuando falla la tecnología ya nos colapsamos nosotros. Como dice, quería también invitar al público presente a involucrarse con el laboratorio. El laboratorio está nuestro laboratorio, o sea, la PXR está totalmente abierto y busca la colaboración con otras disciplinas y también dentro y fuera de la universidad. Ustedes no tienen que saber absolutamente nada de tecnología porque nosotros solo les decimos bienvenidos al club. Así que si tienen ganas de explorar, se les ocurre qué explorar, el grupo de investigación o el laboratorio tiene varios subgrupos de investigación. Vengan con la idea y vemos cómo qué podemos explorar al respecto. Y si no tienen idea, igual súmense para explorar respecto a lo que vamos a encontrar por explorar. So I was just, to finish and to close this, I was inviting my community to get related with the laboratory, because we're kind of open to anybody who wants to work with us, because any discipline is a help. And if we don't know of technology, it just nobody knows about it. So we just are going to find out. So, okay. Again, okay, voy a decirlo primero en castellano. Agradezco mucho, realmente el equipo que ha venido a visitarnos son pioneras en lo que están trabajando. Son un grupo de investigación sumamente interesante, sumamente importante en el paisaje. Han escrito varios papers que les recomiendo ver y hacen sobre todo, a mi parecer, excelentes preguntas. Entonces ha sido realmente un gusto y un honor tenerlos acá. So I'm closing. I was saying that as I mentioned at the beginning, your team is, I consider you pioneers, part of the pioneers in this field of research. The papers your team has published, also videos, are really relevant. And I think, as I mentioned in our first talk back then, you make very good questions. I like very much the questions, the kind of questions you make. And well, again, thank you for the honor and privilege that you have been here. I hope it will be like a push.
Yeah, we look forward to continuing to work with you and crossover.
Okay, so thank you, and we close the meeting. That's not me, that's somebody else. Okay, gracias. Hasta luego.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Okay.